The New South Wales Premier Gladys Berejiklian today said she had no option but to stand down after her state's...
There's nothing short of a stunning day in New South Wales politics.
It pains me to announce that I have no option but to resign from the office of Premier.
As the ICAC investigates whether she breached public trust in relation to...
I cannot predict how long it will take the ICAC to complete this investigation.
Prime Minister...
Gladys is a dear friend of mine. We've known each other for a long time. She has displayed heroic qualities as the Premier of New South Wales. She has been a trusted friend and a very respected colleague. I wish her well.
The search is on for a new Premier of New South Wales.
Treasurer Dominic Perrottet looks to have the votes to become the state's next Premier.
It's been an honour and absolute privilege to be elected as the parliamentary leader of the Liberal Party.
Scott Morrison and Gladys Berejiklian have had a turbulent relationship at times, but during COVID, he really leaned into her popularity and put her up as the gold standard for how to keep a state open and keep the virus at bay. So her departure as New South Wales Premier was always going to have implications.
Yeah, she was always a big backer for him. She was someone that Scott Morrison, could really rely on, right? There are two things really here. We've got the dynamic between the leader of the country and the leader of the biggest state in the country has completely changed. Gone is a reliable support and ally in National Cabinet, and in comes someone with whom there's let's say a slightly difficult relationship, or at least rapport not yet built, let's put it that way.
They can't stand each other.
And then the other one is anti-corruption issues are now back on the federal government's agenda, which they really don't want.
But it's not like Labor is squeaky clean on this issue either.
Yeah, so we've got Labor trying to make the most of this opportunity to say, hey, this is a weak point for the government, we want to focus on it. But then they've got their own circumstance where one of their respected MPs, the head of an important committee, has had to stand down over making admissions of wrongdoing in a Victorian anti-corruption commission, and Anthony Albanese is allowing him to remain.
So we've basically got this bloke that nobody's ever heard of.
The opposition leader.
Defending this other bloke that even fewer people have ever heard of.
In Anthony Burton, right.
And of course there's that other issue that just doesn't seem to be able to go away for the government, and that is Christian Porter.
I am satisfied that a prima facie case has been made out.
We have no idea whose money is involved.
The government is not going to support the motion that's before the House.
When you had an unprecedented scenes of the Speaker suggesting that a parliamentary committee look into Christian Porter and the donations made to his legal fees, and the government went against that.
Really tells us how worried they are about this issue.
We are opening Sydney and New South Wales to the world. Hotel quarantine is a thing of the past.
Today's quarantine announcement surprised many, including the Prime Minister.
Well, we're not opening up to everyone coming back to Australia at the moment. I want to be clear about that.
The Premier says it's time Sydney reclaims its place as a global city.
Well, I think people in New South Wales will be flying to Bali before Broome.
Premier understands that that's a decision for the Commonwealth Government, not for the state governments.
We've now got no excuse for not inviting our overseas relatives and friends to Christmas.
Unless you live in Western Australia, potentially.
In the cave.
Yeah. But extraordinary scenes, though, where you saw Scott Morrison breathlessly rush out because he knew Gladys Berejiklian was going to resign, to say the international border will open, no date set. 2 weeks later, he's having to breathlessly rush out again because Dominic Perrottet, as some are dubbing him, the Premier for Australia, is saying, come one, come all.
And doesn't that tell us everything we've seen over the last 18 months about this, about who is in control of the country, who is making the decisions? We've had New South Wales and Victoria lead the way with lockdowns, much to the chagrin of the federal government. Now we've got them moving to their own beats and rhythms when it comes to reopening back up again, despite the much vaunted national plan. Again, it's the states that are in control.
We know the farm sector relies on, something like 70% of its workforce is foreign, and for 18 months, 2 years now, they've been desperate for workers. So we know they'll be really keen to get access to that labour force, but also the hospitality sector, tourism sector, crying out not only for workers, but customers as well.
We continue to see that disunited states of Australia idea where there's no quarantine now. If you arrive and you're double vaccinated into New South Wales and Victoria, you can go into the community. Anastasia Palaszczuk in Queensland is saying, we look forward to welcoming students back next year, but you'll be going into 2 weeks quarantine.
But the point here, right, is that that's not just the whim of different states, that's a direct reflection of the different political circumstances in every state. The different experiences of COVID-19 is leading to different outcomes in the longer term, not just in the immediate lockdown.
We will make a national decision and we won't be held hostage to what other people may wish.
What's actually happened, Bob?
We had a meeting.
The Nationals debating again whether to back the plan to reach net zero by 2050.
Have you reached agreement though on net 50? Would you agree to double that from 26 to 50%?
I think that's highly unlikely.
David Littleproud is the Deputy Nationals leader. He's on the line. Deal or no deal?
No deal yet.
Liberal and Nationals MPs are preparing for a showdown.
Oh, there's a split.
A second Nationals party room meeting in 2 days, but still no agreement.
So we'll just continue to have our discussions. Currently it is a no.
I'll vote against all of this madness whenever it comes up in the Australian Parliament, and I know there's a lot of people with me around the country.
Nicole, the Nationals are getting together today. It's the third time they've had this conversation in 3 days. It feels like they've talked more about this in the past 3 days than they have in the past 10 years.
I think there's definitely an element of knowing that, yes, there'll have to be a decision, people will have to sign on, but they want to really play with those theatrics to send the message that they are really fighting for those regional people that they keep referring to time and time again.
And here's the trick for the Prime Minister, right? He needs the Nationals to go out there and perhaps sell a net zero story to those voters. And I'm sure those Nationals MPs are going to want to take a great big package with them into those regions by the time they get there at election time to say, yep, we're doing net zero by 2050. We told you it was a terrible idea for years and years and years. How do you think the moderate Liberals feel watching the Nationals have this conversation?
There's organised groups really looking to push the message of the need for action on climate as well. So they're up against that, as well as different messages within their own parties. So they're trying to strike some sort of balance, but it's no easy task.
Australia has joined most of the world's large economies in formally committing to a target of net zero emissions by 2050.
Our plan charts a uniquely Australian way.
The federal opposition is accusing the coalition of failing to properly detail how it'll reach the benchmark.
I've seen more detailed fortune cookies than the document released by the government today.
Australians will see very clearly our plan for how we will meet our targets.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison confirming he'll take the pledge to next week's crucial climate summit in Glasgow.
They finally come to this truce, this peace deal, where Scott Morrison can say the coalition agrees and it's committed to net zero emissions by 2050. And then we look at the Nationals side, and sure, they've accepted that as a target, but what they've really achieved in this process is stymieing any effort in the next decade when the 2030 target is the thing that really matters. So they've both got a bit of something, but ultimately we've ended up with nothing much at all.
Well, perhaps you could take the perspective that the Nats have had a pretty big victory in that they've managed to gain an extra seat at the cabinet table. Now, a lot of Australians may not even know what that means, but essentially that's front and centre on the purse strings. And Barnaby Joyce can really sell it as something that, you know, we've won out of this deal. He also says expect the cash to flow, but...
Where to? Who knows?
Now we have in cabinet Barnaby Joyce, Keith Pitt, Bridget McKenzie, who we all know are not happy with the idea of more ambition on climate action.
It raises a lot of questions about leadership of our political parties, doesn't it? Because you've got Scott Morrison dragged there kicking and screaming, Barnaby Joyce who says one thing and means another, and then where's Anthony Albanese on all of this?
Well, Labor thinks that this plan that Scott Morrison was keen to champion says everything you need to know about the coalition, that it's a glossy but not a lot of substance underneath it.
But what's he putting up?
But at the same time, what is Labor putting forward for 2030? No one knows.
Exactly. We've got 18 pages of not a great deal of announcement here, but Labor isn't offering much.
The awkward situation that Scott Morrison has now found himself in is that domestically he's saying, we're not changing our 2030 target. He's going overseas and saying, by the way, we're going to hit above what our 2030 target was.
The things that has given him that political cover of saying we might get to 35% by 2030 anyway is the fact that we've had legislation and mandates at a state level.
So who is leading the country?
Back to that thorny question again.
This is why the National Party insisted that methane emissions had to be excluded.
They said this is a whole of economy approach. So are you sure that there is this carve-out?
Yeah, there is. Absolutely, 100%.
Prime Minister Barnaby Joyce says agriculture has been carved out of the net zero deal. You're saying it hasn't. Has there been some sort of misunderstanding here?
I have no misunderstanding. It's a whole of economy emissions reduction plan. Thank you very much.
Barnaby Joyce is saying, I've got a carve-out, agriculture's not in it. Scott Morrison, though, says it's absolutely in it.
So there was a lot of confusion this morning. The Prime Minister there was asked a lot of questions about it. He has confirmed that, in fact, there's no carve-out. Net zero by 2050 is an economy-wide target. And interestingly, we're talking about this motion that's going to be debated at COP26 to reduce methane emissions by 2030. I think that's what Barnaby Joyce was talking about this morning. Australia won't be signing up. But interestingly, Scott Morrison just confirmed there we were never intending to sign up. So I'm not entirely sure if that's a win.
We are now in a situation where Scott Morrison leaves the country tonight. He's headed to Europe to sell the Australian climate change pledge. The man who will be the acting Prime Minister, Barnaby Joyce, is a man who just days ago said he doesn't even support the thing.
Buckle up.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison will land in Italy in just a few hours.
Wasting no time on Shark One, prepping to take their climate strategy to the world stage.
Scott Morrison will be rubbing shoulders with fellow world leaders at the G20 summit in Rome.
So Pablo, it was a really messy last fortnight for the Prime Minister. Now we end up with this backdrop. We're in Rome. The Prime Minister is at the G20 summit. It's the precursor to the climate change talks in Glasgow. How's it going to go, do you think?
When we come here and we see the momentum, and net zero, as one expert said to me for COP26, is an entry ticket to 2050. It's not a question, so I think it really highlights where Australia is on the world stage when it comes to climate change.
The French President Emmanuel Macron has served Scott Morrison a scathing rebuke in their first conversation since Australia sunk that $90 billion submarine deal.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison has crossed paths with the French President Emmanuel Macron for the first time since Australia tore up its $90 billion submarine contract.
A furious French president has blasted our Prime Minister for lying to him.
Mr. President, Australian media. Hello.
How are
Andrew
you?
Probin from the ABC.
What did you say to Scott Morrison when he said hello to you? What did you say to him?
Can you
trust him though?
Well, Pablo, that's like one of the most amazing corridor intercepts I've been involved in. I couldn't believe he stopped.
Wow, I'm gobsmacked at what we just saw. Shocked that he stopped, his entourage were trying to get us to move along. Initially reluctant to speak to us, and then unloaded.
You can have disagreements. I do respect sovereign choices. But you have to respect allies and partners, and it was not the case with this deal. And I think this is detrimental to the reputation of your country and your
What did you say to Scott Morrison?
It was a devastating assessment of Scott Morrison. It has totally changed the entire vibe of the trip. It's meant to be about climate change. It's now about French subs.
It was not done with a lot of grace.
Joe Biden's also thrown Scott Morrison under the bus.
Yeah, calling the handling of AUKUS clumsy. You know, he's saying it's the US administration's handling of this, but the US administration gave Australia the responsibility to inform France of this. I think the thing that also really struck me, speaking to Macron, was how personally furious he is. You know, he spoke about Australia and France being wartime allies, gave us that context around that, his time and his fondness for Australia, and then that final grab as he walked off.
Do you think he lied to you? I don't think. I know.
President Macron told a couple of us around the corner that you didn't tell him the truth on the subs deal. In fact, he said that you might have lied. Is that true?
No.
He says he doesn't think you lied to him, he knows you lied to him.
I don't agree with that.